Hi, I've been working on a customer's model SM428 Master Station, rebuilding it and restoring it as close to brand new as we possibly can make it. The repair and the cleanup and the restoration is pretty much done, but I have one more thing I need to do on it for him. One of the things he would like is he would like a 3.5 millimeter or 1/8 inch, which is the same, audio jack installed on the unit so he can plug in his phone or a tablet or Alexa or some other thing. It's just a convenient thing to do. And that's not usually a problem for us because we sell the audio input jacks. We have other videos that show about them, and this is one of our input jacks right here. The problem with this type of input jack is two things. One, this is designed for a monaural system, so it's only one channel. The right and left channels of, say, your phone are mixed together in the jack, and then it comes out of the one RCA plug here. That works just fine. And we could simply take this jack also and wire it up differently and put two cables on it and make it into a stereo jack, and that would work just fine. However, the problem with this jack is it's really, really tiny. And the little threaded portion right here with the little knurled nut that holds it on is, for most installations, just barely long enough to reach through an average thickness of plastic faceplate. It's never ever going to work on a model like this. Why is that? Well, that's because the SM428 has a real oak case, and the real oak case is every bit of 3/8 of an inch thick, and there isn't any way that this little jack is ever going to make it through that properly and be held in place properly. And I'm simply not willing to try to like chisel out a square hole and recess it down in and drill a hole and put it. It's all too hokey. We're not doing all of that. That'll never last. When you do something like this, it should be done in a way that it will be trouble-free and work properly. I would say at a minimum 20 years. I told the fellow I would look around and see what I could find, and what I found was this. This is like the mother of all 3.5 millimeter surface mount or chassis mount audio jacks. This is a beast. This is an all aluminum construction. It has your audio solder connection tabs here on the back side, and on the front you have this really nice aluminum plate with two screws to screw it onto whatever you're putting it onto, and in the center is the 3.5 millimeter or 1/8 inch audio socket. And I can tell you, it's too bad we don't have audio socket vision here, but if we take this 3.5 millimeter plug and we do like this and you push it in, listen carefully. That's a socket. This thing snaps into place. I'm pretty sure that if they're using 3.5 millimeter audio jacks on the space shuttle, this is what they bought. This is like top quality here. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how we're going to install this onto this. And I have an idea. We're going to put it on the bottom because we don't want it to be too noticeable. We don't want it to be showy. I'm not putting it on the top like this because that would be stupid. And I'm also not putting it on the side because I think that would be equally stupid. What we're going to do is we're going to put it on the bottom. One of the considerations is how much room do you have inside? Because you have to have enough room for all of this and for the audio cables to fit through. So we're going to put it on the bottom. And since we're going to put it on the bottom, it seems to me that the very best spot is going to be right in this area down here where we have a certain amount of free space and a certain amount of depth, so it won't interfere with anything else. The first thing we're going to do before we pick up any kind of real tool is we're going to take all the circuit boards out of the back of our SM428. These have all been recently rebuilt by myself. And the last thing we need to do is, say, pick up a cordless drill and start drilling where we have newly rebuilt circuit boards. One slip and then somebody's going to cry. So we'll just unplug these. Simple enough to do. So now they're out of our way. So with the boards out of the way, this is the area where we're going to have the jack come through. And if we take our jack and we sit it in here like this, even though it's going to be coming from the outside, if we put it right here, there's plenty of room for it. It's certainly out of the way, and we don't have to worry about it too much. So I think that's an outstanding spot to put it. Let's go ahead and see if we can get it set up so we can drill a hole. We have to drill a hole in a customer's intercom. How intimidating is that? The first thing we should really do is we should get an idea of how far back we want it to sit. I'm thinking it's about a 1/2 inch, and that seems pretty good. Let's go ahead and flip this over and mark it out and get to drilling. I'm going to start by putting masking tape. So the inside edges of these two strips is the area that we have available to drill the hole. And we're going to put some more masking tape. Some of the masking tape is to mark things off. Some of the masking tape is simply to protect the wood, because we don't want to mark it up in case there's, let's just say, an incident. So that should protect it pretty well. Now what we need to do is we need to figure out exactly where the center of our hole is going to be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up this edge of the jack with this edge of the tape, and that's going to be like that. And then I'm going to take a piece of tape and I'm going to put it here, and that sort of marks off the hole that we have, the area we have to drill the hole, and that should work out fine. The hole we need to drill is not quite 7/8 of an inch and not quite 1 inch. 7/8 is just a smidge too small, and 1 inch is just a smidge too big. So we're going to go 7/8. Oh, and you might wonder, why is that? Well, because nowadays everything in the world of electronics, including something like this, the diameter of the body of this is some metric size. In fact, if we measure it, we can find out what size it actually is. So if we take our calipers and we put them on millimeters and we measure, this measures 23 millimeters. I don't have a 23 millimeter bit, not in the style that I want to use to do this, so we're going to drill small, and then we'll carefully enlarge the opening if needed. So what kind of drill bit are we going to use? We're going to use a Forstner bit. And a Forstner bit is a good choice for this. This is a Forstner bit because, one, it has a pilot pin here in the center, so you can accurately locate it where you want the hole to be, and it will cut a clean, flat-bottomed hole. It won't tear up the oak, and even though you have the flange of the mounting bracket to cover up the edge of the hole, we still want to do a proper job. So it'll cut a clean hole. It cuts a hole with a flat bottom. It doesn't rip through like a speed bit would or something like that, and it's just a good quality bit. It's a nice sharp bit also, so it should cut easily. But before we drill the hole, there's one more thing we should really do. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to take this little scrap piece of plywood and we're going to slide it in here on the inside of where we're going to drill the hole, and we're going to hold it in place with a couple of these squeeze clamps. And you might be thinking, well, why are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that because we don't want to have what's called tear out. So when you drill a hole, especially through a hardwood like oak, you're going to be pushing down pretty hard. And as you get towards the inside and the wood is thinner and thinner and thinner as you drill it away, it's going to suddenly like rip through, and one, it will tear the wood on the inside instead of just cutting it nicely. And also, if it just blasts through when you tear out the inside of the oak, it could, in theory, get out of control and hit the talk module or some other problem, and we don't really want any of those bad things to happen. And we also don't even if we were very controlled, we don't want to tear out the inside of the wood because it's going to look unsightly, and the guy sent it to me to make it all better, and if we make it bad, then he'll be unhappy. So caution is important. And once we do that, we're going to locate our bit where I want it, and you can, mark this out, measure it, make a dot, do all those kind of things. But if you've done this kind of stuff for a long time, you can eyeball it. That should be fine. So we'll start off kind of slow. Yeah, you can see that. Did I mention that Forstner mitts make a lot of sawdust? Let me get something really quick. Oh, here's one right here. We'll take this We're going to put this like this and see if we can keep some of the sawdust from going inside the set. That's why compressed air was made afterwards. We can vacuum it off and blow out the sawdust. I think we're pretty close. We might be all the way through because the wood shavings change color, and if I move my move that out of the way, if I move my piece of scrap plywood, I can see it moves in the hole. So we've drilled all the way through. That's how quick and easy it was. I think we should vacuum this up real quick, so let me get the vacuum. That was a NuTone CV750 central vacuum power unit with a 50-foot garage hose attached to it, which we have here in the shop for cleaning up. So we'll take this away, and yes indeed, we have our hole. Now, the question is, will this fit? I think it's going to be a little too tight. Yep, just a little bit. So, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to need to enlarge this a little bit. So let me get something to do that, and I'll be right back. So what we're going to do is, I have in the cordless drill, I have a rotary rasp. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rasp out the opening as carefully as possible so the audio jack will fit in properly. It's just a hair too tight, won't quite slide down properly, so it shouldn't take too much to do this. So I'm going to do a few seconds so you can see, and then because it's important that it be done properly, I have to stand in front of it so you can't see, so I'm going to turn off the camera. And that's the basic idea. You very carefully go round and round and round without pushing too hard. You need to go in a clockwise direction, and you just very carefully rasp it away to enlarge the hole until it fits. So as soon as I get it so it fits properly, I'll be back. After just 3 or 4 minutes of rotary rasping, now it fits in properly. I suppose that I'll have to add to my list of things I need for the shop the proper size metric Forstner bit to drill out the hole properly, because even though the rasping was fairly easy to do and it only took 3 or 4 minutes, it was better to just drill a hole. Now that this fits in here properly, the next thing I want to do is drill 2 pilot holes for the screws that go in the corners to hold it in place. And I'm going to do that before I take the tape off, because that way I can line up the edge of the flange with the marking tape and make sure that we get it straight. That one. And that one. Now that we have those drilled, for right now we'll leave the tape in place, because this isn't going to do us any good unless we put some cables on the end of it. So let's do that now, and then we'll put it all together. So let's make up the audio cables on the end of our audio jack. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 2 standard pre-made RCA audio cable. This was a 2-foot cable, and I just simply cut it in half. So each one of these is about 12 inches, a little more than 12 inches long, I think. They have pre-made RCA plugs on the ends. I prefer to buy pre-made ones. These are good quality cables. These actually come from Radio Shack. And you can still buy these from Radio Shack online, and they're a good price. And the thing that makes these really good is when you cut them open, you'll see there's a lot of copper inside. Lots of times when you buy cheap cables online and you don't really know where they come from, when you cut the jacket and the core off, what you find inside is there's barely any copper inside of them, and that's no good at all. It's really the amount of copper that's important, and these are good quality cable. I've been using these now for probably the last 8 or 10 years, and they're a good price and they work well, and pre-made ends, that's the way to go. So on the end of our audio jack, we have 3 terminals. We have a small one, another small one, and a large one here. The large one is the ground, and one side is left and one side is right. It doesn't matter which cable you connect as left or right, because you can just plug it in at the other end one way or the other way to make up for it. So it doesn't matter. The ground from each cable goes on the big lug. What we're going to do is, before we start, I'm going to take a little heat shrink tubing here, and I'm going to put it over the cables, because I don't want this all flopping around inside the unit and looser than it needs to be. It's better if they're contained in the center so they don't get in the way of things, and it just makes it a little more organized and a little bit nicer. It also, I think, helps prevent them from being pulled loose from the connections here. It's just one of those things that I think is a good idea to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my wire strippers. These kind here work really well, and I'm going to first strip off the outer jacket to expose the ground shield inside the audio cable. I'm going to cut it back about 1 inch because we have lots of cable length to work with. There's no reason to make it super short. After we solder it, we can always cut off the extra. So all you have to do is approximate 1 inch, and you go around and score the plastic jacket on the cable a little bit and pull carefully, and it'll come right off. And then you have all of the little copper strands that make up the ground shield, and I'll pull them all to one side like this, and then simply twist them together. Like that. Nice tight bundle. And then I'm going to cut off the silicone core. So the core wire is inside this white part. This white part is made out of some kind of silicone probably, and the copper wires are in the core of that. And so you want to cut the silicone jacket off. You want to leave about 1/8 of an inch from where you made the first cut so the wires don't touch the ground wire. And we'll just go like that and pull it out. And you can see there's a nice amount of copper inside this. It's not necessarily the number of strands. A lot of people, oh, my cable has 14 strands of copper in it. Well, that's great, but it really comes down to what is the gauge of the strand. Because you could have super fine strands and have 14 of them, or you could have 8 strands that are 3 times as heavy, and it would be 50% more than the other one. So it all comes down to the gauge of the wire more than anything else. I'm very happy with these. So we'll do the second one. We'll cut the jacket off and twist up the ground like that. And then we'll cut off the silicone covering on the core like that. And now our 2 audio cables are ready. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do the grounds first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pair them up side by side, and I'm going to twist the 2 grounds together to make one bundle, and then I'm going to insert it through the hole, and I'm going to use my little needle nose pliers, and I'm going to route the first core through the opening in the other one of the small connectors like this. And what you want to do is you really want to wrap it around. You don't want to just stick it through and solder it. I know this is hard for you, really can't see this, but this is like close-up detailed work and I actually have to see what I'm doing here. But you just want to wrap it around the connector. Like that. Because you want a good physical connection, not just a solder connection. Because remember, solder is not structural. Solder eventually will crack. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder this side first, because that helps keep it all from flopping around and being loose while I'm working on the rest of it. And so we have that side done. And now we're going to do the other core, and we're going to do it the same way. Put it through the hole. Use the little screwdriver to help it come through. Pull it. Like that. And then we'll wrap it around the terminal like this. Trying to keep it as somewhat of a tight bundle. If it all gets spread out, which the little strands will, sort of straighten them out and then twist them together again, and then finish wrapping it around like that. Sort of smooth it out. You know, the way you have to look at this is you only have to do one. It's not like you have to do a million of them. You only have to do one. So how much time have I spent on this so far? I don't know. What's it been, like 2 minutes maybe? It's not that hard to do. It doesn't take that long. Do a good job. You won't have to do it over again. Alright, so we have our two cores attached. And now we're going to do the same thing with the ground. It's already through the hole. So what I want to do is I want to wrap it around the terminal like we did before. And I think what I'll do, because it's heavier, I'll use the needle nose pliers to bend it around. Push it through. Grab it, pull it tight, wrap it around again. Like that. And that should be pretty good. Now we'll solder that. I am using my regular soldering iron, but I do have a larger, heavier tip on it, which gives it more thermal mass, which makes it easier on a heavy thing like these solder lugs. Once you've done that, it is important to make sure that none of the cores are touching the ground, because if it does, it'll bleed through or bleed across and you'll lose that channel. So that's pretty good. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my heat shrink tubing down over it like that, and do it that way, and maybe put another piece up here. So let's go ahead and heat and shrink the heat shrink tubing. If you have a hot air station, this is a good multi-purpose way to do this. You use your hot air tool and you simply shrink the tubing. If you don't, you can use a heat gun, or you can actually use your soldering iron and you sort of rub it back and forth against the heat shrink tubing, and that will work okay in a pinch also. Like that. And you can see how it's shrunk around the terminals. You can sort of see them through the heat shrink tubing, and that actually works pretty well. So now I think we're ready to mount this onto our SM428. Let's go ahead and take our tape off. That. And we have a few little burrs which we'll knock off. Hold on a second. Remember, neatness counts. One of the nice things about having a big giant hole like this is you can make all of this up, the audio connector and the cables, outside the unit, and then you can't put them both through at one time, but you can put one through, and then when the cable's through, you can put the other one through. And that makes it kind of easy. Put that like that. And then we'll take our screws, which came with the audio jack. It's one of the things you have to be careful of when you buy something like this that you haven't maybe ever bought before, is to make sure that the screws actually come with it, because sometimes, surprisingly enough, screws are extra, and then you get the jack and then you're surprised that, hey, there's no screws, and that means a trip down to the hardware store. Now, one of the things I'm noticing here is that these screws are kind of long. I'm going to take these out again for a second. They're kind of long. They're much longer than they need to be. They're probably every bit of 5/8 of an inch long, which is a lot longer than they really need to be for what we're doing. So I'm going to cut them off a little bit because they're too long. I don't want to strip out the heads. So I'm just going to nip them off with a pair of side cutters like that. If you make them if they're too long, when you try to install them, the longer they are and the further deeper they go in the hole, the harder and harder it is to turn. And if it becomes too hard to turn, you'll strip out the head, and then you'll be unhappy because not only it probably won't be tight and you won't be able to take them out again, but it'll look lousy. And even though it's on the bottom, neatness counts. There's our permanently mounted audio jack. Looks like I bought one, don't you think? Now if we turn this around, all we have to do is plug it into our audio jacks, which are right here. So here's a close-up of the audio jacks. They're mounted on the main board on the back of the faceplate, right next to the AM/FM stereo tuner. And there are 6 jacks. This column is phono, this column is tape, and this column is auxiliary. And of course there's 2 jacks for each input because it's stereo. So it's right, left, right, left, right, left. Now, which one is right and which one is left? Without looking at the service manual, I couldn't tell you. But it doesn't really make any difference because when you plug it in, it's going to be either right or wrong, and if it's backwards, you just unplug them and change them around. The way I always do it is red is right, because that's just easy to remember. And we're going to plug these into the auxiliary jack connections, because I don't know what the fellow is actually going to plug into it, but it would be an auxiliary device. Now this may look really long here like this, flopping around like this, but you have to remember the majority of the SM428 is contained inside the wooden case, and then you have the cutout with the wall housing behind it, which has very little in it. So there's a lot of space inside of an SM428, and this won't be a problem at all. And here's the back of our fully reassembled NuTone SM428. I put the amplifier boards back in, I put the audio preamp boards back in, you've got the multiplex board and the power supply back in place, and here's our audio jack that we added in with the cable assembly that loops around and plugs into our auxiliary RCA jacks. So that's how you would install a permanently mounted audio jack on a NuTone Intercom system like an SM428, and there are other models that this would work on also that have much thicker than average cases, and it's another option for people if you want to do something like this. I hope you found this interesting and perhaps helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube, because that always helps. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell or on the wheel, put in your email address, and every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.